So, of course, late last night, a lawyer for President Trump and his campaign sent a cease and desist letter to former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon. The letter accuses Bannon of breaching his employment agreement with the campaign by communicating with author Michael Wolff about Trump and his family, disclosing confidential information and, quote, making disparaging and in some cases outright defamatory statements to Wolff about Trump, his family members, and the Trump campaign. Trump attorney Charles Harder said that Bannon's actions, quote, give rise to numerous legal claims, including defamation by libel and slander, and breach of his written confidentiality and non-disparagement agreement with our clients. Legal action, he says, is imminent. The Trump campaign has threatened legal action without following through on multiple occasions previously, including against the New York Times, and in October 2016 against women accusing then-candidate Trump of sexual misconduct. Bannon so far has not responded to those developments overnight. But of course, earlier in the day, the president responded in a blistering statement about Steve Bannon. He says, quote, Steve Bannon has nothing to do with me or my presidency. When he was fired, he not only lost his job, he lost his mind. And now that he's on his own, Steve is learning that winning isn't as easy as I make it look. Steve had very little to do with our historic victory, which was delivered by the forgotten men and women of this country. Yet Steve had everything to do with the loss of a Senate seat in Alabama. Steve doesn't represent my base. He's only in it for himself. Steve pretends to be at war with the media. Yet he spent his time at the White House leaking false information to the media to make himself seem far more important than he was. It is the only thing he does well. Steve was rarely in one-on-one meeting with me and only pretends to have had influence to fool a few people with no access and no clue, whom he helped write phony books. Like me, many Republicans love the United States of America and are helping to finally take our country back and build it up, rather than simply seeking to burn it all down. Joe, when I read that statement yesterday, I've never seen anything like it.
No, never seen anything like it. I don't really know where to start. Of course, it's not, if only somebody had warned him about taking Steve Bannon into the White House. If only someone had warned him about letting Michael Flynn be his national security advisor. Well, I'll just stop there. This is the line I love the most, Nick Confessori. Donald Trump attacking Steve Bannon, saying, quote, he's only in it for himself. I got to do one of those Chris Matthews laugh. That is so rich. He's only in it for himself. And yesterday, apparently, lawyers in Washington, D.C. were able to get their clients to waste a lot of money. Manafort now suing Bob Mueller. Lots of luck on that fella, and lots of luck on Donald Trump suing Steve Bannon. You can talk about that, or what's your bigger takeaway on all the news that came flooding out yesterday?
Well, Joe, you know, I'm thinking of that scene in The Godfather where Fredo is out fishing and somebody cuts his neck from behind. So when I read that statement from the president, that's the first thing I thought of. I have never seen anything in presidential politics that is remotely like that anywhere. It's astonishing. This is a president in Wolff's telling who is surrounded by people who hate him and hate each other and don't respect him. It is hard to imagine the first 6 months or a year of a White House with that level of open disdain for the guy in the Oval Office. And it is impossible for a presidency to function in those conditions. And of course, we are seeing that this presidency does not really function in an orderly way. It's very good news for Bob Mueller, by the way. And if he wants to kind of peel his people apart and turn them against each other, he has a lot to work with.
Boy, he has a lot to work with. And you're talking about the White House. And again, for those of us that have been reporting on the White House, none of this is really much of a shock. I think we may be stunned by just how harsh Steve Bannon went after the president and all of his people. But the actual news is not that harsh. But one of the more jarring memos that came out was from Gary Cohn, supposedly from Gary Cohn. And Casey, tell us exactly about that memo and what he said.